Now, following the report into equality in cricket and with Wimbledon starting on Monday, the hot topic of conversation is the gender pay gap in sport.
Wimbledon have already equalised prize money between men and women, yet with men playing more sets than women. Does this seem fair? I'm not so sure.
Joining us now to discuss this is journalist Peter Lloyd. So there you go. There's a question from Phil. Is it fair, particularly if women aren't playing the same number of sets as men, but should we be equalising pay across the board?
Well, first of all, Phil, I love your work. I'm a bit of a fan. And Esther, fellow Liverpoolian, represent. Love it. What a great start to the morning. On the basis that should men and women be paid the same in sport? On the basis that women are female? No. With all due respect, being female is not a skill. It's not an achievement. It doesn't deserve any financial reward. And last time I checked, sport and financial reward for sport was based on skill and excellence. Now that is the calculus which should be made when sportsmen's salaries or sportswomen's salaries are being decided. And this whole argument is so basic. It's a real example of basic bitchery, if you don't mind me saying so early in the morning. I mean,
I've got to give a shout out to the women football players, though. Something men haven't been able to do for ages is win the sort of the Euros. And we did, didn't we? We did well, didn't we, in the football?
Yeah, I mean, they did do pretty well, but let's face it, the bar was pretty low. Women's football is literally in a different league compared to men's. And that is why it's not comparing like with like. If you look at FIFA, for example, that generated something nearly £8 billion in the last 3 years. Women's football doesn't even touch the sides of that. In fact, men's football subsidises quite heavily women's football.
OK, so that's a money matter, money matter.
But just let me say, this argument that women and men should be paid the same, OK, but which men? Men aren't paid the same even within the same football team. So what are they talking about? Which men?
Yeah. Fair point.
Peter, when you said it was about skill, I just want to question that a second because, you know, Wimbledon, they have equal pay at Wimbledon. And obviously, we all know that I think it was one of the Williams sisters played against a very lowly ranked man, the man still won, even though he was rated 100 and something in the world. So probably because of physical differences, a top man will beat a top woman at tennis. But surely the key thing here is that Wimbledon, the final, for example, is a sellout, whether it's the men's final or the women's final. So if it's a sellout, irrespective of whether it's men or women playing, surely they should both benefit equally financially from the fact that the ticket sales are exactly the same.
Right. I mean, I obviously wouldn't want anybody to be unfairly discriminated against, but for men and women to be paid the exact same, the variables have to be exactly the same. And as you pointed out at the beginning of this segment, Wimbledon is a prime example of feminism gone off the rails because they equalise the pay, but they expect men to work harder and longer matches. Men have got to perform best of 5 sets. Women only have to do best of 3 sets. That is not equal pay for equal work. Per game, women are earning more money. That is sexism. And I know you have Sharron Davies on the show. She's very vocal about her opinions when it comes to men and women in sport. Why do I never hear women like Sharron Davies talk about this obvious, glaring example?
Well, we're going to ask her.
Well, Peter, your wish has come true.
We're going to ask her that, and you've made some very good pragmatic points.
We're joined now by Olympic medalist and author of the new book, Unfair Play, Sharron Davies, MBE. Sharron, you're probably hearing what Peter had to say there. What do you make of this row about whether or not men and women sports people should be paid exactly the same?
It's not cut and dry, is it? And I do understand some of his points. I take massive offence to the point where he talks about skill. I would say that the women's game was very, very skillful. You know, they had the largest football audience of the whole of last year, so people wanted to watch it. The pay gap is absolutely massive. I've got a lovely quote here, which is from the FA way back in 1922 when they banned women from playing football. It said the FA has had a consultation. Complaints have been made to the football being played by women. Council felt it was impelled to express upon opinions and substantially would ban women's football, and it was not encouraged. Now, for 51 years, women were not allowed to play football because men were in charge of it. That's the same as men have been in charge of the IOC. You know, football wasn't in the Olympic Games until '96. We need to support them to grow the women's game because obviously girls want to do it. Physically, we are different. However, when it comes down to tennis, I agree. I absolutely agree. Women should play 5 sets. You know, and then in swimming, we've worked really hard to get equal events at the Olympic Games for swimming, and now we have that.
So I'm going to point to Sharon there, because I think, in a way, I think you're spot on, Sharon, and I think it makes it fairer and more equal, and it doesn't look as if you're somehow trying to overcompensate the women. I think that would be a fair judgment.
Let me argue against myself, though, Sharon. Because I've made that point myself many times, but I'm going to argue against myself because I thought you made a very good point about.
It saves me doing it, Phil. Yeah. Saves me doing it.
You made a good point about skill because I guess the other argument against that is that in tennis, I mean, I'm not a massive, I watch all sport, but tennis wouldn't be my first choice. But for my observation, I'll
do that for you, Sharon.
My observation in the men's game. The men wangs it down at about 150 miles an hour. The person on the other side of the net doesn't even see it, and that's the end of the point. And then they go on and repeat that every single. Whereas in the women's game, you get much longer rallies because they don't have that same physical strength on the serve.
It's a different game, isn't it?
You get much longer rallies,
and so there is football, really, to a degree. It's a different game, and that power makes a big difference. And in football, it's about 50%. Males kick 50% harder than females kick. So that power that comes from the biology that we have as females means that we have a different kind of skill set. In swimming, I've always felt like there's been great parity. We've had a men's race and a women's race. It's been at the Olympic Games. The cameras are on us both at the same time. And we alternate with our medal ceremonies, etc., etc. Same with track and field. It's in sports where you've got men's leagues and women's leagues and you've got big history and huge amounts of money. I mean, let's be very honest. Take Chelsea. Chelsea's women's is a much more successful team with results than Chelsea men's. However, one of the Chelsea men's team, we could pay for the whole of the women's team probably 10 times over.
And I think that's
there is ridiculous non-parity.
And that's the point Peter brought up, really, is where the money's coming from, and should that be fairly attributed to the men and women?
But before you go, Sharon, tell us about your book. Yes. Tell us about your book that you've written.
So the book is a history of the battles of women's sport, really. And talking about things like 1% of the sponsorship dollar in America, and it's pretty much the same in the UK, goes to women in sport. 4% of the airtime. So if we can't see it, we can't be it, all right? So part of it is the media trying to promote it. Part of it is big sporting bodies that have historically been very misogynistic, been run by men, and are still primarily run by men in lots of cases, going, OK, how do we help to build the women's game? Here's a really good example. So my daughter was working for Guinness during the recent Six Nations. She was working for a company, and she was obviously placing PR for the men's, and she had no problem. She could place it 12 times a day. When she had to do exactly the same for the women's teams, the only media were interested in was how difficult it was to juggle being a mum, or where you were going to get your hair done and what makeup you were wearing. Now, so we need to get the media to talk about the sport and the skill and the training. And those rugby girls wanted to talk about that. They didn't want to talk about their hairdressers. But, that is what happened. So the book is a culmination of all sorts of things. It talks about the East German era, which was obviously what I lived through and why I'm so vocal now about trying to fight for fair sport for females. It talks about all the science with regards to the transgender debate. But it also talks about the, historical unbiased problems that women have had in sport and the ongoing problems that we have in sport. And you think that we're getting better parity, but in lots of ways we're not. We get maybe better appearance of football and rugby and cricket. But when it comes to a lot of the other sports, if I said to you now, could you please name me the best female swimmer in the UK presently? Not sure any of you could do it.
No,
and it's a lady it's a lady called Freya Anderson who won 6 medals at last year's European Championships. And we have 2 British Olympic gold medalist swimmers, females.
Sharron Davies, I'm going to say thank you for all that you do to champion women in sport.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
And good luck with the book.
Good luck. And I also want to say, don't think it's only swimmers or rugby players or female footballers they ask about hair. Can I tell you, the same conversation goes on with journalists too, women in politics as well. Not can we talk about policy, but where'd you get your hair blow dried? You're quite right. It's something that all the media's got to get away from and actually talk about what the person does. Thank you.